under an apple tree in a Warsaw backyard. A jar has been sitting in the dirt for 2 years. Inside it, the names of children who don't exist anymore, not because they died, but because someone gave them new ones to survive. The woman who buried it saved 2,500 lives this way. She was arrested for it, tortured, both her legs broken, trying to make her talk. She never gave up a single name. For 60 years afterward, almost nobody knew hers either. Her name was Irena Sendler. She was sentenced to death for a crime she never confessed to. And even that isn't the strangest part of what happens next. Warsaw, 1939, Irena Sendler is 29 years old, a social worker for the city's welfare department. She is not Jewish. She has no obligation here beyond the one she assigns herself. Her father was a doctor who treated the poorest patients in town, many of them Jewish, refusing no one, even during a typhus outbreak that eventually killed him. Irena grew up believing that was simply what a decent person did. When the Nazis invade Poland and occupy Warsaw, she keeps doing her job, distributing aid, tracking down families in need, filling out the unglamorous paperwork of a welfare department in a city under occupation. For a while, that is enough. In November 1940, the Nazis wall off a section of the city. Nearly 400,000 Jewish residents are forced inside a space built for a fraction of that number. The Warsaw Ghetto. Overcrowding. Privation. Disease spreading through streets with no working sanitation. Irena's welfare department technically still has jurisdiction over public health inside the wall. She applies for a pass to enter, officially, to inspect for typhus. The Germans, obsessively afraid of the disease jumping the wall into their own quarters, approve it without much scrutiny. Irena begins going in, regularly, sometimes more than once a day. She brings food, clean medicine, money, smuggled under bandages, inside medical bags. She is not yet thinking about getting anyone out. She is thinking about keeping people alive one more week. That calculation changes in the summer of 1942. The Nazis begin mass deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto to a camp called Smuggled. Trainloads leave regularly. Almost no one returns. Irena understands, faster than most, what Treblinka actually is. Keeping someone alive inside the ghetto one more week no longer means anything. If that week ends with a train, she joins Egota, the Polish underground's council for aiding Jews, and becomes head of its children's section. The shift in her thinking is total. The only aid that still means anything now is getting people out. Specifically, the ones small enough to hide, quiet enough to smuggle, young enough to grow up under a different name and forget they ever needed one. Here is what that actually required in practice. A courthouse sat on the ghetto's edge, one door opening into the wall, the other opening onto the free side of Warsaw. A child could walk in as a Jew and walk out as somebody's nephew visiting from the countryside. An ambulance made daily runs delivering medical supplies. It could also leave with an occupant hidden beneath the stretcher, or in a specially built compartment under the floor. Trams occasionally carried a sealed toolbox, a suitcase, a sack of potatoes with something breathing inside it, a newborn, sedated with a mild dose of medication to keep it silent at the checkpoint, could be carried out in a carpenter's box. None of this worked if the child made a sound at the wrong second. Irena's team rehearsed silence with children too young to understand why silence mattered. And here's the part of the job that had nothing to do with logistics. Irena had to be the one who knocked on the door and asked. She could not promise a parent their child would survive what came next. The strangers, the new names, the years of separation, possibly forever. She could only tell them the truth if the child stayed. The ending was closer to certain. She recalled, later, the sound of those conversations staying with her far longer than the war did, parents asking if she could guarantee anything. She never could. She asked anyway. Some said yes. Some could not bring themselves to say yes, and Irena never blamed them for it. The children who left the ghetto did not simply vanish into safety. They were placed with Catholic families willing to take the risk. And it was an enormous risk, since Poland was the only occupied country where helping a Jew carried an automatic death sentence, no exceptions, no appeals. Where a family couldn't be found, children went to convents and orphanages run by nuns who asked fewer questions than the law required. Every child received a new name, a forged baptismal certificate, a story about parents who had died or moved away. Some were young enough to eventually believe the story themselves. That was, in a strange way, the goal. The more completely a child forgot, the safer that child was. It also meant that if the war ever ended, the child would have no way of finding their way back. Irena decided this was a problem she could solve later, and in the meantime, refused to let it be solved by simply letting the names disappear. She wrote them down. Real name. Adopted name. Birth family. New address. On thin strips of tissue paper, in a code only a handful of people could read. She kept the growing list at her apartment for a while, which was its own kind of insanity, a single document that could unravel the entire network and every family involved. In it, sitting in a drawer, eventually she and a colleague sealed the strips inside glass jars and buried them in a friend's garden under an apple tree where German search patterns were never going to look. The plan, such as it was, survive the war, dig the jars back up, use the names to reunite children with whatever family might still exist. It was a plan built entirely on hope that had very little evidence behind it. She kept it anyway. October 20th, 1943. The Gestapo comes for her. Someone in the network has talked, or been caught, or simply been unlucky enough to be watched at the wrong moment. Before they reach her apartment, Irena manages to pass the most recent, most dangerous fragment of the list to a colleague through a window. It survives. She does not know yet whether she will. She is taken to Pałayak prison. The interrogation is not a formality. They want names. The network, the safe houses, the families sheltering children who by law are not supposed to exist anymore. She gives them nothing. They break both of her feet and her legs methodically over repeated sessions, trying to make the silence more expensive than she could afford. The silence holds anyway. Unable to extract anything and unwilling to let the interrogation continue indefinitely, they sentence her to death. Seketa does what it can, which turns out to be bribery. A Gestapo guard paid enough money to falsify a report. Irena Sendler is officially listed as executed. She is, in fact, released, badly broken, and immediately goes into hiding under a different identity for the remainder of the war, unable to walk without help, unable to stop working entirely either. Officially dead, functionally still doing the job, as much as 2 shattered legs would allow. That contradiction, a woman continuing dangerous underground work while erased from her own official existence, would have made a fitting end to the story. It was not the end. It just meant the story stopped being visible for a while. The war ends. Poland is not liberated so much as transferred to a different set of rules. Irena digs up the jars, 2,500 names, give or take, written on paper that had survived underground longer than most of the people it referred to. She and others begin the work of matching names to survivors, a task complicated by the fact that the overwhelming majority of the parents listed in those jars did not survive the camps they had been sent to. Most of the children Irena saved would grow up knowing something had happened to their real families, without ever fully being able to reconstruct who those families were. The jars did not undo what the war did. They just made sure the erasure wasn't complete. Some children were found. Most of what was found, in the end, was simply proof that they had once had another name, which was not nothing even if it wasn't enough. Poland's post-war government was not interested in celebrating wartime resistance networks, especially ones with ties to the London-based government in exile. Egota's former members were investigated, harassed, occasionally imprisoned by the new regime for the crime of having organized outside its control. Irena Sendler, like most of them, said very little publicly for decades, not out of shame, out of the simple fact that no one was asking, and the political cost of volunteering the story wasn't obviously worth it. She lived in Warsaw. She continued in social work. She raised her own family. The woman who once walked into a sealed ghetto to smuggle out children, who were legally not supposed to exist, spent the next several decades as, functionally, nobody in particular. Warsaw. In 1909, 4 high school students in rural Kansas are assigned a National History Day project. They find a single paragraph about a woman connected to some vague, unverified number, a few thousand children maybe. They cannot initially confirm she is even still alive. She is living quietly in Warsaw in her late 80s, largely unaware that anyone outside her own circle remembers what she did. The students write a short play based on what little they can piece together. It is called Life in a Jar. It becomes, slowly and then quickly, the reason the rest of the world eventually hears this story at all. 60 years after the jars were first buried, dug up by teenagers who had never seen Warsaw, working from fragments in a library, Irena Sendler lived to see her story told, which is more than most people in it got. She met some of the children she'd saved, now elderly themselves, still carrying the names she'd written down decades before as the only proof that another version of their life had ever existed. She received formal honors late in her life, Poland's highest civilian distinction, a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize she did not win. None of it seemed to land the way honors are supposed to land. In letters from that period, she kept circling back to the same arithmetic, unprompted, uninterested in the ceremony in front of her, that she could have done more. Every rescuer she'd worked with, she said, felt they could have done more. This was not modesty performed for an audience. It was closer to an accounting she ran constantly, against a number that could never be made to feel sufficient, regardless of how large it got. She died in Warsaw in in 2008 at 98 years old. By then, the jars had been empty for over 60 years, their contents long since matched, unmatched, mourned, or simply lost to time along with everyone who might have claimed them. The apple tree the jars were buried under is gone now too, as most things eventually are. What is left is the number, imprecise as it's always been, approximately 2,500. No one, including Irena herself, ever claimed exact certainty on the count, and the specific, deliberate act of writing a true name down on a scrap of paper, when the entire machinery of an occupation was organized around making sure that name would never be spoken again. She did not do this so the world would remember her. She did it so 2,500 children would have a way, however incomplete, of remembering themselves. Somewhere, a jar this story never accounts for might still be in the ground. Not every hiding place was recorded. Not every name made it onto paper before the war caught up with the person carrying it. That absence is its own kind of evidence of how much more likely erasure was than rescue, how much this story is the exception rather than the rule of what actually happened to children in occupied Warsaw. Irena Sendler spent the rest of her life doing the math on that exception, and never once landing on an answer that let her feel finished. If a stranger asked you to give up your child, with no promise of ever seeing them again, only the certainty of what staying would mean, what would you have said? And if you were the one asking, would you have been able to keep asking, knowing most of the answers would be no? Tell me below. There's another name in another jar waiting for its turn.